Is 5th edition the only RPG you should play, or is it infinitely hackable to represent all sorts of different genres? We're going to find out right now. Hello everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, your favourite D&D and tabletop role-playing game podcast. I'm Ben Byrne, and I'm here as always with Sean Merwin, Dale Kingsmill, James Hake. James, can you remember what is the best Christmas gift you have either given or received?
Certainly the most influential one I ever received was a gigantic Lego set of it was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. It was the Chamber of Secrets.
Oh, that's cool.
And that Lego set formed the core of so many like proto D&D role-playing like games for me. Something about the fantasy, and I'd have my Bionicle figures kind of tromping through it all. It was just such perfect make-believe for me, and it's a feeling that in a lot of ways I'm kind of constantly chasing by making stuff like this, or at least hoping to give other people the same kind of feeling.
For sure. Sean Merwin, best Christmas gift you've either given or received?
Oh, going back to my childhood, my brother and I received a pinball machine. Now, it wasn't a big, beautiful electronic pinball machine. It was sort of the best pinball machine that you could make and put together for like $5. But it was still, it was a stand-up one. You could stand on it. The flippers worked. It went up the machine and it kept score. So it was kind of cool in that way. And then my brother, at least probably less than 2 weeks into our owning it, took it all apart because that's how he works, but could not put it back together again. So it was the shortest lived but most exciting Christmas gift I'd ever received at that point in my young life.
Very nice. Dale Kingsmill, best gift you've either received or given?
I feel like I've received a lot of great gifts and probably given very few excellent gifts. It's something that stresses me out, but I have to say, the gentleman, he's been here in the background the whole time. I don't know whether he's in the rectangle on YouTube. Sorry to listeners on audio only methods. Oh, we've got to Tuesday. I got to go and get the standee.
Him?
And people can describe it to the listeners. All right, here we go.
Good Lord, man.
This is... This is...
It's a meerkat?
Yeah.
So this is...
It's a stuffed meerkat is what I have always seen.
Yeah, that's what people are like. Do you have a taxidermied cat, a mummified cat in your background? No, this is the gentleman. He's an art piece by an artist called Hip Hip Decay. It's made from old repurposed, like it's sort of nice things that are old enough that they would have been thrown out. So it's like old music sheets and lace and sort of things like that. And he's been turned in. You can see he's got sort of pantaloons and boots and a scarf on here. If I turn him around, he's kind of dressed like a pilot. And I immediately fell in love with this thing. It's so creepy and just so delightful, and it gives me such a bizarre sort of positive energy. See his little tail on the back. He's according to the information on the Hip Hip Decay website, is meant to be a stoat. And my parents saw him at a restaurant they went to and asked where it came from and whether it was for purchase. And the people said, actually, it'd be great if you bought it because we actually had to move it into this room because a child was scared of it. So they sold it to my parents, and I immediately fell in love. And I think that was either last Christmas or the Christmas before. One of those. Anyway, I love the gentleman, and it is one of the greatest gifts I have ever received. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I'm obsessed with him.
Yeah.
Just as long as you know, Dale, that he's creepy, I'm glad that, if you had been like, he's so cute, he's adorable, I just want to hug him all the time.
But also creepy. Like, that's the thing, is that two things can be true.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's true.
I am sad that there is no the gentleman in the Monster Grimoire now.
That
That
could
would
be
have been so good.
that could
Yeah.
be Dale's next blog post for the Ghostfire Gaming blog is the gentleman's stat block.
We need a
and,
stat
like,
block
lore.
for the gentleman for sure.
Oh no. If it has a stat block, you can kill it. You can't kill the gentleman. He's
Okay.
Exactly.
So the gentleman's like
Very
the
true.
beast, is what I'm hearing. You know,
Yeah,
he's
he's
just this
beyond us.
existential. Yeah, right. People go mad if they look into the gentleman's eyes too long.
Yeah, exactly. I also like the image has the statue, the whatever you want to call him has a name, but I never use it. I call him the gentleman because I feel like there's something a bit fey.
I feel like, yeah, you should never tell anybody what the name is, just so that, like, because if anybody learns its real name, then they can also control the gentleman. So
Yeah,
it's like
and then I would be in great danger.
I got, when I was younger, a Game Boy. It was one of the big, it was a green one. It was a big brick of a Game Boy. You could have taken someone out with it. But it was my brother's before it was mine. So it was a hand-me-down, and it was a birthday gift actually from him. But my birthday's around Christmas, so it counts. But what reminds me of it, first, a little bit what Joey said. It was my introduction into video gaming as a hobby, which became like a massive thing and is very influential on the way that I like to tell and engage with stories in the role-playing space. But also it had this really long, like 2-page contract that came along with it and basically stipulated that the previous owner of the Game Boy could always have access to the Game Boy whenever they wanted. So it was a bit of a very, very lovingly given, but a bit of it came with conditions, which always stuck with me as something funny.
What a setup.
Yeah, exactly.
What a con.
But speaking of giving things away and Christmas gifts, there is actually something that you can go and get right now from Ghostfire Gaming, which, James, I'm sure you'll be very excited to be able to announce, is the first chapter of the first episode of Fables, Citadel of the Unseen Sun. It is available for download right now. Anybody can get it to preview Fables. The link is just below. So go, if you're on YouTube, or it'll be in the show notes. If you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes, it'll be in the show notes, so you can grab that link and go and download it. James, what can you tell us about this? Because you designed this initial dungeon, didn't you? This was something you designed.
The thing you will know from the very outset of this fable, if you play through this chapter, is that death is not the end. we are throwing you in the deep end with the beginning of this fable. What may seem like a standard dungeon crawl will soon reveal itself to be anything but. And that you and your players will be in for an adventure the likes of which you may never have seen before.
The thing I really liked about it, reading through it, again, without giving too much away, but to tempt DMs and players, is the trap design in there. None of the traps, and this was something I wanted to talk with you about a little bit, actually, is the traps are not like sprung and done. Which is my new catchphrase for traps that I'm trademarking right now, sprung and done. They're very interactive, you know, they're very like you need to, like they're a puzzle and a trap kind of mixed together rather than just being something that's a gotcha against the players. Is that kind of your approach to trap design, is generally keeping it open and engaging?
Yes, I have actually very strong opinions on trap design. And they stem from my strong opinions on, get this, hit points. And they come out of video games. So let me take you down my sort of mind rabbit hole a little bit, when I promise you we'll get back to traps. Have you ever played Doom?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Doom, in essence, first-person shooter, this kind of prototypical first-person shooter. And you are basically like a space marine who murders a lot of demons, basically. In Doom, and in a lot of shooter games that have followed it, there's two types of weapon damage. There are projectiles, which move in real time, and there's hit scan, which instantly hit you. in with a hit scan weapon, as long as the enemy's aimed properly, you are going to take damage because it's instantaneous. They point at you, they hit the shoot button, you're there. With a projectile, you can dodge out of the way, or you can shoot it or something else. I hate this. I hate hit scan weapons a lot because to me, taking damage should always be your fault. And a weapon that doesn't give you a chance to roll out of the way, or something that doesn't kind of show you something that doesn't give you an intellectual opportunity to overcome it, isn't a very fun challenge. And so traps that are just like, oh, you didn't search for traps every 10 feet of the dungeon, I'm going to take off some of your hit points, is like, what? Hit points to me are a measure of how many times you can screw up before you're dead. And if the damage didn't involve a screw up on your part, then what are we using hit points for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to think about trap design, because the Angry GM has an article where he talks about taking inspiration for traps from the Dark Souls games, specifically because the way that those sort of, areas are designed and the way that traps are designed in that game do this thing where they signal to you, oh, look, you can see that there's a crossbow in this rubble. It misfired, like it was empty. That part of the trap didn't work, but you know that it's there now. And so you can kind of try to sort of collect clues in order to figure out, oh, never step on the red tiles or whatever, like for a poor example. But there's a whole article about that I know that the Angry GM's a bit of an acquired taste, but I think that article in particular is very, very worthwhile if you're interested in trap design.
Dark Souls is a really interesting game to bring up because it does one thing really very differently from how tabletop games do it, which is it expects you to die and learn by error a lot. But it is, in many ways, a remarkably fair game. It shows you its whole hand. All of the bosses have these really big wind-up attacks, and they do a really good job of telegraphing what they're about to do. The traps are kind of shown to you beforehand. And hypothetically, a hypothetical person who is incredibly observant and has tremendous reflexes could probably beat Dark Souls first try without dying. It's unlikely, but the tools are all there for you. And in tabletop games where you do not have the benefit of a save file and multiple tries, and if you're dead, you're dead. Those sort of telegraphs are really crucial to building in a good game experience, especially at low levels, I find, where people are made of paper and they just die instantly.
Yeah, another good writer of trap knowledge is Greg Marks, who has written recently blog posts for Ghostfire Gaming. He did a series on traps for Kobold Press, and a lot of what we're talking about he also covered. And I think both James and Dael have come up with good explanations, and I can only add on that you don't want traps just to take your hit points, because that's no fun, and you can get hit points back fairly easy in D&D. You want there to be story elements. You want there to be other challenges with a trap other than just it takes my hit points away.
Sure.
Yeah.
The one thing, speaking of influential people on trap design, or at least the way that I run trap design, there was a video from someone online called Dale Kingsmill who did a video on traps a little while ago.
Cheeky.
Sorry to embarrass you now. No, but
Never heard of
legitimately, I thought that this was very, for the whole video, the one thing that really stuck with me to this day that I still remember is the idea of click, where when somebody
That's what I stole from the Angry GM as well.
Right, there you go. So
There you go.
the DNA travels down through. It's this idea that, like, when a trap is triggered, if the players didn't detect it, they get a click. Something kind of like they hear a sound, they hear something winding up, they hear, a spell, warming up. They smell something in the air, maybe. Whatever you describe to them, they have like a reaction's worth of time to quickly do something. They throw themselves at the ground, they throw themselves against the wall, they pull their shield out in front of themselves, and the GM can decide to allow them to have advantage on a saving throw, or they avoid the trap entirely, And I really liked that as just a simple way. I mean, it is a very like sprung and done trap. That's where I think of this coming into effect for the most part. But it allows players to make an informed decision into the trap and try to avoid it based on the description that the GM gives them. And if they don't avoid it, then it is kind of their fault, Like if he's saying, something up above begins to, like, you hear a rumbling sound and they drop to the ground, well, maybe they're going to have rocks fall on top of their head. But
it just gives them back a little bit of that agency so that when they take damage, they feel like, why did I do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Making your dexterity saving throw is in world agency. The character is jumping out of the way, but it isn't actually agency in the hands of the players because the GM says, make a dex save.
Make a
and you're
dex
like,
save,
I guess I'm making a dex save now.
But the other, speaking again to the first chapter of Fables, is this idea that the players can largely see the danger, like they can see the trap and what it might do to them, but it doesn't mean just because they know it's there, they can just navigate around it, which can often happen with those sprung and done traps of just like, I use my thieves' tools. Did I succeed the check or not, which I really love about it. So if you want to check out the first chapter of Fables, like I said, there'll be a link in the show notes if you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes, or in the comments section or the description to this video if you're on YouTube. It is still available. You can get the first 12 months of Fables for $9.99 each month if you subscribe before the end of December. So you got about 2 weeks from when this video is live, and then it'll be $14.99 after that for each chapter or episode, I should say, as they release over the months. James, this is the last month before Fables is birthed into the world. This is one of your final opportunities to really talk about Fables before it's been seen by other people. Do you have any final guttural cries of excitement and or despair to give?
Wow.
From the depths of my soul. No, all I have to say, for people who have not checked out the Fables demo yet, for people who are thinking about it, for people who are excited for what grim new horrors will await in this very first Fable, let me just say, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Indeed.
Also, Ben, sorry, I can't help but get in the weeds with you on this one. When
Please.
You're talking about these traps, are you talking about the crystal ball, the crystal eye in the middle of the room? Yeah. Okay, good. I knew you were talking about this one because this one is super duper cool. Like, I won't spoil how it works because I want the players to figure it out. But that one was a really fun trap to build around because it's a dungeon central trap. It affects what happens at the end of the dungeon. So it's like I expect 90% of all players to get caught by this trap, and for it to have a major effect. But if they don't, if they manage to play really, really cleverly and avoid it right, then their characters will get a sneak peek of something that they otherwise wouldn't see until episode 6 of this series. They get to see the entrance of the final dungeon before they actually begin the adventure, really. Yes, so that trap is very cool. I'm very excited for people to bypass it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing about Fables is that you'll also get a sneak peek in the first, maybe not the first chapter, but in the first episode releasing in January, of some of the monsters coming in the Monster Grimoire. I know there's something when I was reading through Fables, I was like, what is this thing? This thing is really cool. And then found it in the Monster Grimoire a couple of weeks later when I was reading through that. So exciting times all around for 2022.
Hell yeah.
Dael, speaking of your videos, you did a video, and I'm going to put a link right there, over there somewhere, probably on the far side of the screen from where I am, to this video recently, which I believe, you could correct me if I'm wrong, you called this an apology to Sean Merwin, where you talked about the thing that I took from this video that really stuck with me, because I've heard this opinion expressed a couple times, is this idea that D&D or 5th edition D&D is very it evokes one style of fantasy, or at least, it's not quite as hackable as people think that it is, or tend to believe that it is. And you'll run into problems if you try to represent other genres, other ideas through 5th edition D&D. And I think that's very true. As someone who likes dark fantasy, I know. You run into problems very quickly when you're trying to represent low dark fantasy, when every time a wizard crawls through a bog and stands up at the far end, they just squeegee clean their clothes using a spell, and then they're, completely fine again. And I just want to drill down into that a little more, whether that is a shared opinion, and how to tackle other genres if you want to in 5th edition. Because there's a debate. I feel like I'm going to really start to get into the weeds here, but there is a debate that I've seen online, which is like, if you love tabletop role-playing games, you really should look beyond 5th edition and try other types of role-playing games. And I think that that's very true, but I think that 5th edition, there's something about it that it's like vanilla ice cream, but it's not vanilla ice cream. It's really chocolate ice cream. But if you ate nothing but chocolate ice cream, you'd think that it was the only taste of ice cream that there was. Now I'm just rambling. But I guess what I'm saying is, do you want to elaborate on what is the type of fantasy that 5th edition is, and why don't you think you can kind of stray beyond that at face value? Because I know in that video you did start to experiment a little bit with it.
Yeah, because I do absolutely agree with all the things that you've just said, all the things that people tell me, all the things that people told me over and over and over again in the comments of this particular video. I called this video me betraying Sean Merwin for 26 minutes because we, in a previous episode, it might have been the Halloween episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, we talked about running horror or spooky games rather than horror games in 5th edition, and the idea that because 5e is designed, I think it is specifically designed to evoke quite high heroic fantasy, right? There's a lot of magic. Magic is everywhere. High fantasy heroes can do all sorts of cool stuff all the time. And I think that the game is designed with that in mind. I think the way that magic works in the system encourages that thought process. And we sort of talked about how, you probably can't effectively run horror with the 5th edition system. And you maybe shouldn't, because there are all these other games that can do that are built for it, and that mechanics built for purpose, will often be more effective. But after we recorded that episode, I had it stuck in my head. I had that conversation stuck in my head, even though I agreed with it. And then I watched Scream at a friend's house for the first time. And
with Matthew Lillard?
Yeah, yes. And I was like, "Ooh, isn't this interesting?" Because it's a meta horror, right? It breaks down a lot of the tropes of horror that came before it. So I started thinking about horror tropes in general, specifically as they applied to sort of teen slashers. And then what it ended up being was just sort of a design experiment, right? Like if you are interested in designing tabletop RPGs, I think it's very important that you go and you play games other than 5th edition. But I did get curious as a designer, thinking, how can I make 5e be a horror game, have it evoke teen slasher of the 90s with as few changes to the rules as possible? And that's what the video ended up being, sort of this idea. I didn't want to write anything new. I didn't want to create anything new. So sort of just rearranging what was already there. And yeah, I don't know. I think it became this thing. We've talked previously about the idea that different mechanics can be used to evoke the same thing, but on the other side of that, the same mechanic given different flavor sentences can be used to evoke different things. And that's kind of what I was playing with there. So I don't know, even though I do firmly still believe that 5th edition is not built for certain genres, maybe I'm just wrong. So my apologies to Sean Merwin. I do feel bad for betraying you for 26 minutes straight.
I don't feel betrayed, and I want to see this game that you're coming up with, because I want to see 5th edition used in a lot of different ways. And what you were talking about made perfect sense And then you said with making as few changes as possible. And that's the important part right there, because you can do lots of different things with 5th edition. Because what is 5th edition but a bunch of abilities that you have a proficiency for that you roll a d20 and add to? You can make those skills anything you want. You can make those ability scores anything you want.
Sometimes with advantage or disadvantage.
Precisely. As we talked about before, what the issue becomes, how powerful can a character be and still feel horror? That's the crux of the question, I think, because 5th edition makes characters pretty powerful at first level, with the ability to cast spells and the ability to go beyond what a normal person can do. And so it really comes down more not to the mechanics of 5th edition, but what is horror, and what is fantasy horror as opposed to teen slasher horror, as opposed to meta horror, as opposed to supernatural horror. You can go on and on and on.
Yeah, ghost movie versus a zombie movie, even, like completely different tropes. Yeah,
because like Lovecraftian horror is, no matter how good you are still no match for the Elder Gods and Cthulhu and all of those.
The Gentleman.
The Gentleman, who is definitely a Cthulhoid. It's staring at me still as I move. Its eyes are following me, and I'm going to see it in my sleep tonight. But that's the question, and I think that's the bigger question of how many different kinds of fantasy are there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, I set that challenge for myself of not wanting to write anything new, but I did have to rearrange things in a very dramatic way, right? I don't think that you could really evoke the feeling of, the kind of horror that I'm talking about while playing as a rogue and a cleric and a wizard. So what I did instead was I took class mechanics from all over the place and rearranged them into their own little packets. And I called this is the jock, which was mostly fighter stuff that was, given different titles, I will admit. But, and you say the goofball, who gets a little bit of bard and a little bit of cleric and a little bit of, the prep ended up with a weird mix of like paladin and barbarian abilities, but just taking those, not changing them, but repackaging them just a new skin that says, yes, you are the rich kid, which made a world of difference. But I suppose it also does sort of leave room for people to sort of say, okay, but is this really changing as few rules as possible when you are basically creating new classes with what's already there? Personally, I was very pleased with how it turned out. I think I came up with a couple of cool optional mechanics that are, I think I'm an unappreciated genius in my time personally. But
well, you're appreciated by at least a few people here.
Yeah.
I mean,
thank you.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say, what I actually liked about it is, I think that a lot of people who want to hack 5th edition, and I might go into some reasons because I have thoughts about why you would as opposed to playing other systems. But what I liked about it, Dale, was the fact that you came up with, new classes and those only went really to 5th level, is accepting that, like, not all of 5th edition is appropriate for certain genres. I very much think that Gothic horror, Lovecraftian horror, existential dread, all that sort of stuff can very much play into 5th edition. And in fact, one of our commenters on I think the Halloween video said that, just because you can't personally be threatened doesn't mean you can't be horrified by something. And I think that's very true. But once you start to get to levels like 10, 11, 12, that's when it does really start to break down, because players can, characters can get such crazy combinations. I had someone multi-classed a monk and a rogue or something, and they had evasion and advantage on dexterity saves. I can't even remember what, but basically they just could not be touched. Their armor class was like 19, 20 at 13th level. So it was just nothing I could do to dexterity save, dodged out of the way. Hit them, tanked it on the armor, or dodged out of the way, or whatever it was. Going into way too much fidelity about this one specific character. But anyway, the point being that I think that if you take 5th edition and kind of don't feel tied to needing to use all of it, then it becomes much easier to kind of see how it can be hacked for different systems. Even if as a GM you say, all right, for this game, there's 4 of us, one of you play a spellcaster and the others choose a martial class, right? And as long as all players agree to that's the game that they want to play, then I think that it's fine not to have all options available all the time.
It feels really interesting to me that if you look at a game, I'm thinking specifically of Powered by the Apocalypse. There's a lot of games that are powered by the apocalypse, using Apocalypse World as a chassis to do a lot of wild new things, but still keeping the basic mechanical underpinning intact. Those games are, I think, seen as highly legitimate new indie RPGs based off of an Apocalypse World core. But if you use the 5e SRD, even in a limited capacity, I feel like there's kind of a stigma that surrounds hacking D&D to do what you want it to do. And maybe that's just because it seems kind of like if D&D is everyone's first RPG, then maybe it's a little bit immature. Maybe you haven't progressed beyond D&D and found something more mature than that game. Sorry, I shouldn't demonize people who love indie RPGs. I love indie RPGs also.
I'm about to go further in a minute. Demonize them if you want.
I agree with you.
Demonize jerkbags is who I'll demonize. People who poo-poo other people's people who yuck other people's yum.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. There, I see the attitude online a lot that, sort of suggests, and I don't mean to make any broad statements against anyone, but, you should play other systems other than 5th edition D&D. And learning a new game system, maybe it's not quite as intensive. Maybe this is a bit of a false equivalency, but it's like learning a new language, right? You have to learn how that system works. And then the opposite argument comes in at there's lots of light, easy systems to learn. They don't all have to be as crunchy as D&D, but maybe I want to play something as crunchy as 5th edition D&D for as crunchy as it is, that evokes a science fiction feel or a horror feel or whatever it happens to be. I kind of this is going to be really dumb, but when I owned an Xbox for years and years, and then I went over to PlayStation and had a PlayStation instead. And the 4 buttons on the face of the Xbox and the PlayStation, the A, Y, X, B, and circle, square, triangle, X. I had no idea where the triangle was. I still had to even to this day, I know exactly where the Y is.
Swapping to Switch was extra hard because they're the same letters for Switch, but they're in different positions.
Yeah,
it's evil. It's truly evil.
And complicate that by complicate that by.
My house has 2 gaming consoles, and they're an Xbox and a Switch.
That's kind of what it's like learning a new game system, right? Is even when we were playing Fate in the future, we fell into patterns of playing it like it was 5th edition because that was the language that we knew to kind of translate. So that's my TED talk on why it's okay. I encourage people to learn new systems, but why it's okay to stick with 5e if that's what you want to do.
This is a great segue to me complaining for a little while. Because, okay, I make these videos from time to time. I'm interested, the way that I have fun as a GM is that I hack the system, right? So I make these videos about Dungeons & Dragons and I say, let me pose a philosophical question. What if D&D 5th edition didn't have levels? How would that look? And I sort of play that out in video, and I get all these comments all the time from everyone saying, at that point, it's not even 5th edition, just play another game. And then somehow they get even angrier if I say that I do play other games. And so there's really no way to win. But you
end up enlightened, Dael. How could you regress back into the darkness?
No! And it's this strange place where you're torn between people who love D&D, and so they don't think that you should mess with the system, and people who are kind of at the point of villainizing D&D fully, and so they don't want you to play D&D at all. So you kind of end up in this weird limbo where everyone's unhappy with you. I would like to point out to everyone who commented on my Horror 5e video that Kids on Bikes as a system actually is not great for running a teen slasher horror game.
So there
just
you
because
go.
it says jock doesn't mean it's the same thing. But, so the thing that I need people to understand, there are, any number of reasons that I talk about 5th edition and I hack 5th edition for my YouTube channel. Part of it is that this is my livelihood. This is my job and I need to make money and more people are searching D&D. Let's just put that one right up top.
For sure.
But also what Ben is saying is that there's this shared language because D&D is so popular. There's a shared language that makes it really easy to talk about design with regards to Dungeons and Dragons in a way that people will be able to understand what you're saying. If I started talking about kids on bikes and hacking that system, I would require that everyone understood that system as well as I do. And you're just not going to get the same level of stuff. At the same time, if we're talking about indie games, if I'm publicly hacking this system and saying, I don't like how this class works, so I'm going to change it, that's fine if I'm talking about D&D, who's this huge, powerful monolith who, no matter what I say, it's not going to affect them. But it has real, tangible effects of punching down if I'm talking to, John Gilmore, if I'm talking to even Green Ronin games who are, relatively up there. It still has an effect on them and their sales and their reputation, all those. I'm not saying that I'm like a big deal, but I'm saying, talk is everything in the indie space. So that's a lot of things. But the thing that I think is the most important that people just don't seem to understand is that this is how I have fun. Lots of GMs have fun in different ways. And the way that I have fun is that I mess around with the system. So when I play Kids on Bikes, I hack the system. When I play the Dragon Age RPG, I hack the system. When I play Pathfinder, I hack the system. When I play Fate, I hack the. No matter what I'm playing, I mess around with the rules just because I think that that's fun. I like getting in and I like tinkering with it. So, my YouTube videos are me sharing what I've done. And it just so happens that I'm sharing the D&D ones because I think it would be in poor taste to say, hey, I rewrote the entire dice rolling system for Kids on Bikes.
Sure.
That's my personal opinion on why people hack and why people hack 5th edition specifically. I think that there's probably a lot of people who are hacking everything, but we're only publicly showing the 5th edition stuff because of a million different little reasons.
Yeah.
Can we just flip that entire segment? Can we publish that as like a standalone thing? Like that?
Exactly.
That was incredible. That was wonderful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, why do we play these role-playing games? We play them because we want to tell a specific story with a group of friends. And if the machine that you're using to get the output of that story isn't creating that output, there are certain things you can do. You can replace the whole machine with a new machine that is more likely to give you that output, or you can take pieces off the machine and you can tinker with it in a way that will hopefully give you that output, that outcome that you are looking for. And neither way is right and neither way is wrong, because the fun of it is the process of figuring out how to do that.
I love this metaphor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's what all game design is, whether you're playing D&D or running D&D or tinkering with D&D or creating your very own system. You always have to be thinking of that. What's the point of this? How do we want the players to feel? How do we want to feel as the GM running the game? And then how do we want that outcome to be? And the mechanics are important because they are ways to get there. And the mechanics that you choose will drastically change that outcome. So, it's an experimental process to make the game be exactly what you want it to be. And if you want to run it totally as is, right down to the very last adjective in the spell descriptions, you can totally do that. That's fine. That's a totally cromulent way to play the game. But there are people that are not going to want to do that, and that's okay too.
Yeah, and the only thing that's wrong is hounding people for doing it in a way that's different to you.
That is also a hobby that many people have in this industry, I've found.
Yeah, Dale, it's just
It's how they
I
have fun with the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I just want to harass you online. That's how I have fun. That's terrible. Please, nobody clip that part of the video out. All right. Well, with all that said, because we've talked pretty extensively about horror. Obviously, well documented dark fantasy through Grim Hollow does a good job, I think, of evoking that sort of stuff. Throwing just some random genres out there, how would you hack 5e to do, let's say, historical fantasy or something that is very, set in the Roman Empire? Doesn't fantasy still part of that? Doesn't have to be like fully historically accurate. You don't have to do the rise of Caesar, and if one thing goes wrong, it's, what if Caesar never rose to power? Or what if Caesar is the BBEG of your campaign? What changes would you make to 5e? It doesn't have to be Caesar, it could be Vikings, could be anything, to make it more historical realism.
Caesar was a BBEG of many real people's campaigns.
That's
in
true.
that time period.
That is true. That is
The
true.
Gauls, for example.
Yep.
And look at that. The Germanics actually got him. They won that campaign.
There you go.
You're playing as the conspirators. Brutus is what, a level 7 fighter. Rogue, no, he stabbed him. Anyway, is this dark? Is this a dark conversation? I'm not sure.
Oh my gosh.
I would get worried if I was
Ben?
surrounded by if I was surrounded by 32 people with one level of rogue. I would be very worried, no matter how high level I was.
Yeah,
You're all getting sneak attack off of this.
Done goofed. Should have listened to that divination wizard.
I guess with that question though, like, does 5e still work if you try to strip the majority of magic out of it? You say the only magic class that's available is a druid, and even though that's probably one of the most magical classes, being able to transform into animals, or a bard, they're the only two magical classes available to
Bard would
you.
be a good one.
Or when you're playing a paladin, when you divine smite instead of like it being
Was
like
Mark
a magical...
Antony a bard?
There you go. The big questions. All right, no, new question. Let's go through history and assign a class to like everybody who lived around. King Arthur, is he a paladin or is he a green knight?
Well, I think to get to the actual question, we have to remember that they did not necessarily think that magic did not exist back then.
Yes.
So you could run a historical campaign and use magic because they believed in certain types of magic. And you may have to scale it back a bit or change the way that it works. So you can still have wizards doing spells, but like the last episode or a future episode, I don't know which, that I talked about the player who brought technology into the world and his magic missiles were a Roman candle.
Yes.
You could still do that as as the magic in a historical realm.
It's why I like, just quickly harkening back to the previous episode, is two shows, Vikings and The Last Kingdom, are two TV shows that are both kind of set in, old England during the Viking era. And hot tip for anybody, if you watch Vikings up until, I think, season 3, and then start The Last Kingdom, they actually almost sequel into each other seamlessly. But the thing that I like about the way cool. that magic is represented in those shows is that they're presented as being historical. Neither of them are actually historically accurate, for the record. I'm aware of that before I get comments. But they're presented as being like having historical realism to them, but present magic as almost like coincidences. There's one character who dies and they believe that this character is in Niflheim suffering, and that they've passed over into Valhalla when they see a rainbow in the sky. And it's like, was that rainbow, is that magic? Is this a magic show, or did that rainbow just happen to be there because it was raining earlier in this scene? I love the kind of like signs
it's a little bit
and
like
subtle
magic in the it's a little bit like magic in the Mary Stuart Merlin trilogy, where he is magic, absolutely, but like casting spells is really, it's a lot. So the magic usually takes the form of signs and symbols. Yeah, that's kind of cool. One of my favorite shows that I would love to make a D&D game that sort of fed into it is Kingdom, actually, which a lot of people mistake for The Last Kingdom. Kingdom, which is a Korean show about
the Korean
zombies.
zombie show. Yes.
It's so good. It's one of my all-time favorite zombie texts. It's just so good. But the other thing that was great about it was that it's a historical setting, but it's one that we're not particularly used to because it's Joseon period in Korea, and just in the West we don't really talk about that so much. But they have guns, but then they're super, super limited. It's sort of the equivalent of Victorian era in terms of technology. So the whole way through the show, it's mostly swords, bows and arrows, and like they've got like one gun for most of the show. But it's that sort of really limiting the scope of what players can do in order to evoke these different things. Sorry, what were you going to say, James?
I don't know.
Doesn't
matter. It was a passing thought. There will be 3 more of them in the next couple of minutes.
All right. Well,
it also
go ahead, Sean.
You could also go back to the question that we've answered before: what are hit points?
Yeah.
Because if hit points are more social standing as opposed to your physical health, you can heal people's hit points. You can cast Cure Wounds, but what are you really doing? You're bolstering their resolve. All right, hit points are your will to go on,
I like
as
it.
opposed to actual physical damage.
It all ties in. That's what in the horror 5e, I ended up changing. It all ties together. I ended up changing hit points to luck points because I wanted it to represent that idea of your luck has run out. But when you take a breather and when the goofball makes a joke about the situation you're in, you feel a little bit better about yourself, and your luck kind of rises again. So that's a great point from Sean.
That actually kind of solves a lot of the problems about hit points that I was talking about too, whereas hit points are a punishment for screwing up. But if hit points just kind of represent how lucky you are to avoid danger, then the fact that you had no input on whether or not you lost hit points actually doesn't bother me that much. It's just bad luck.
I mean, you could. I really liked, Dale, in that video you talked about keeping hit points secret from the players so that they don't know when their luck is running out. I like the idea of, because this was asked to me by a player. I might have mentioned it when we were talking about hit points. They were like, it just feels a bit weird that we keep getting like slashes and gashes, but then we're fine, even 5 minutes later because we're getting healed, or not even. We're just still walking around with half our hit points. I like the idea of like, you roll the dice, you see that the attack hits, you tell the player, all right, this attack has mechanically hit you. Describe to me how you avoid it. What happens for you to get out of the way of this attack, and how are you using up your luck? So that you're not describing a hit being a physical hit, but a near miss, if you will, which might have even been a word you used.
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea of hit points, I mean, this is becoming central, right, to the idea of genre, because when you talk about horror, it's perfectly reasonable when you're looking at horror texts to go, okay, well, this person got caught in a bear trap and they got, slashed across the back, but they're fine until the moment suddenly the bad guy, breaks through the wall and kills them in one shot, which was something that I reflected in the idea that one of the actual mechanical changes that I made was that when you run out of hit points, you don't fall unconscious. You don't know because the GM is tracking your hit points for you. You don't know that you've run out of luck. And so the next time you take damage, you're just done. You're dead. And that really works for horror, but does that reflect in sci-fi? Does that reflect in a drama game? Like once you start changing genre again, do you have to start messing around again with hit points? You talked about the historical sort of setting for a game. I wonder whether part of that might be just taking the emphasis on combat and damage entirely, put the focus on, the social part of the game, the exploration pillar of the game, and just really diminish the importance of combat. But I suppose, once again, you end up with that question. At what point is it the ship of Theseus? At what point is this not 5e anymore?
What does
if you're trying to do something kind of historically realistic, it really makes you think about the way that the human body can take punishment, because it's really not a hit point system. You can take a blow to the leg and be fine for every other part of your body, or sometimes you just take a bullet wound to a non-vital area and suddenly the shock kills you, right? the way that hit points work are a fine approximation for a very specific type of game. And maybe if you're doing a historical game, you might want to do something like Afflictions, where you have a broken leg, but as long as you have not taken a mortal wound yet, you're still good to go.
You know what else you could do? What Sean was saying about, hit points suddenly represent your social standing. What if you basically just took the system as it exists for combat and just used it? I mean, I've seen people talk about doing this, just applying that to social, like, repartee, right? If you're playing a highly political, this is the Roman Republic and we're all negotiating and trying to keep Caesar out of power, maybe that combat becomes just verbal sparring. And instead of it being, you have this weapon proficiency, it's like, well, you have, proficiency in intimidation, right? Use those skills and just apply that pre-existing mechanical system that people already understand to the social pillar of the game. That could be fun.
Some people swear by it.
Well, quickly cutting across to another very topical genre. How would you do a Christmas adventure or a seasonal adventure? What are, the monsters you'd use, the lore that you would draw upon? What do you think would make
first I would run Fate.
Right, yeah, I think I would run Fate Accelerated. Yeah,
I think that's probably a good idea.
All right,
the bad guy could be someone who, I don't know, is giving gifts, but they're bad.
Yes.
That was a great idea.
I'm loving this.
I bet Ben's going to steal all this.
I'm going to write this down, actually.
believe.
Let me just...
that rat.
Let me just get this all down on paper. Well, I think that is going to do it. This is actually the last episode that we're recording for this year. Next episode, next week, we're still here. We're not missing a beat. We will be here next week as well with the Eldritch Lorecast. But as my fellows are alluding to, we have something a little bit special for the next 2 weeks for you to listen to while you're possibly traveling to and from relatives, if you are going to relatives, or whatever it is you're celebrating, or just hope you have a nice break if you are taking some time off over the holiday period. If you want to keep the conversation going, talk to us over Twitter. We have our Twitter handles just below our names, or if you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify or somewhere else where you can't see us, you can email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. Ask us a question. I would love to come back to a full inbox next year to start continuing this podcast and answering more questions and having more debate, because now I want to talk about how social encounters work in the game and whether a combat system works for it. But we don't have time, Dale. We don't have time here for that conversation. So that'll have to wait until next year. James, any parting thoughts on 2021?
I just want to echo what you're saying, Ben. Please force us to have an episode where we do nothing but burn through your questions. Make us draw every topic from things that you want to know, rather than just whatever nonsense we want to spout off here.
And if you can get us fighting with each other, even better. Whereas we're screaming red-faced and pointing at each other at the screen.
We get along too well at the moment.
It'll be just like Christmas.
Yeah. I'll betray Sean Moen once again.
Fantastic. Even if you, it's just occurred to me, leave a comment down below on the YouTube video if that's where you're watching this as well. We do read through those. So leave us a comment there and I'll pluck a few of those out to mill over during the Christmas break. But until next year, have a very safe, a very happy holidays. I've been Ben Byrne, as always, with Dale Kingsmill, Sean Merwin, James Hake. Go out like Christmas cheer and spread the word of the Eldritch Lorecast. And until 2022, we will see you next time.